The air on the remote outpost of Epsilon 9 was thin and metallic, carrying the faint hum of machinery that never slept. Dr. Elias Carter adjusted the collar of his thermal suit, the fabric scratching against his neck as he stared out the observation deck's reinforced glass. Beyond the station's flickering force field, the barren landscape of the planet stretched endlessly, a jagged expanse of crimson rock and swirling dust storms. It was a lonely place, but Elias had chosen it for that very reason. Here, far from Earth's bureaucratic noise, he could focus on his research, the study of alien ecosystems and their potential applications for human survival. Elias was a man of science, not adventure. At 34, his life had been a series of calculated decisions, each leading him further from the chaos of human emotion and closer to the cold, predictable logic of data. Yet, as he sipped his lukewarm coffee, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The station's sensors had been acting up all day, their usual rhythmic beeps replaced by erratic chirps. He dismissed it as a glitch, but now, as he watched the horizon, a faint streak of light caught his eye. It was moving fast, too fast to be a meteor. The light grew brighter, cutting through the planet's perpetual haze. Elias's heart quickened as the object, a ship, he realized, plummeted toward the surface. It wasn't one of the sleek human vessels he was familiar with. This one was angular, its surface reflecting the dim sunlight in jagged patterns. It crashed with a deafening roar, sending a shockwave that rattled the station's walls. Elias stumbled, catching himself on the console. His mind raced. Should he call for help? Investigate? The protocol was clear. Unauthorized landings were to be reported immediately. But the nearest human outpost was days away, and whatever or whoever was in that ship might not have that kind of time. Curiosity won out. Elias grabbed his emergency kit and headed for the airlock, his boots clanging against the metal floor. The station's AI, a monotone voice named Lyra, warned him of the risks, but he silenced it with a sharp command. He'd spent years studying alien life from a distance. He wasn't about to miss the chance to see it up close. The planet's surface was even harsher outside the station's protective bubble. The wind howled, carrying with it a fine red dust that clung to his suit. He activated his helmet's visor, the HUD displaying a map of the crash site. It wasn't far, but the terrain was treacherous. He moved carefully, his breath fogging the inside of his helmet. When he reached the crash site, the sight took his breath away. The ship was massive, its hull scorched and cracked but still intact. Strange symbols glowed faintly along its surface, pulsing like a heartbeat. Elias approached cautiously, his scanner in hand. The readings were off the charts, energy signatures unlike anything he'd ever seen. He circled the ship, looking for an entrance, and found a gaping hole where the hull had buckled. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning metal. That's when he saw it. At first, he thought it was a statue, a towering figure slumped against the wall, its armor gleaming even in the dim light. But then it moved, a low groan escaping its helmet. Elias froze, his instincts screaming at him to run. But the scientist in him took over. He stepped closer, his scanner whirring as it analyzed the figure. It was alive, though barely. The armor was unlike anything he'd seen, a seamless blend of organic and mechanical elements. The helmet's visor was cracked, revealing a glimpse of the creature beneath. Sharp, angular features and skin the color of polished obsidian. The alien's eyes snapped open, glowing a fierce amber. Elias stumbled back, his heart pounding. The creature raised a hand, its movements slow and deliberate. It spoke, its voice deep and resonant, though the words were unintelligible. Elias's translator struggled to keep up, spitting out fragmented phrases. Help, blood, bond. Blood? Elias frowned. Was the alien asking for a transfusion? He glanced at his emergency kit, which contained basic medical supplies. But this was no ordinary patient. The alien's biology was completely unknown, and the risks were enormous. Yet, as he looked into the creature's eyes, he saw something that stopped him cold. Desperation, yes, but also a flicker of hope. The alien gestured to its chest, where a deep gash in the armor revealed a wound beneath. The blood, if it could even be called that, was a shimmering silver, pooling around the creature's feet. Elias hesitated, his mind racing. He could walk away, report the crash, and let someone else deal with the fallout. But something about this moment felt important, like it was a crossroads not just for him but for something much larger. He made his decision. Opening his kit, he pulled out a syringe and a vial of anticoagulant. "This might hurt," he muttered, more to himself than the alien. He approached cautiously, his hands trembling as he prepared the equipment. The alien watched him intently, its breathing labored but steady. Elias found a vein, or what he hoped was a vein, and inserted the needle. The alien didn't flinch. As the blood flowed into the vial, Elias felt a strange sensation, like a static charge running through his body. The alien's eyes glowed brighter, and for a moment, their gazes locked. Elias felt a surge of emotions, not his own, but the alien's. Fear, gratitude, determination. It was overwhelming, and he nearly dropped the vial. When the transfusion was complete, the alien's breathing eased, and its posture straightened. It spoke again, the translator this time delivering a clear message. "You have given me life. In return, I will give you purpose." Elias didn't know what that meant, but before he could ask, the alien stood, its towering frame casting a shadow over him. It extended a hand, and Elias, against his better judgment, took it. The moment their hands touched, the static charge returned, stronger this time. Images flooded his mind, visions of battles, of worlds beyond imagination, of a threat that loomed on the horizon. When the connection broke, Elias staggered back, his mind reeling. The alien regarded him with something akin to respect. "Come," it said. "There is much to do and little time." Elias hesitated, glancing back toward the station. He knew this was the point of no return. But as he looked at the alien, he realized he'd already made his choice. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready to face it. Together, they stepped out of the wreckage, the wind howling around them like a warning. The journey had begun, and Elias could feel the weight of it settling on his shoulders. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. His life would never be the same. The alien's ship, though damaged, was a marvel of engineering. Elias followed the warrior, who called itself Thor, through the twisted corridors, his boots clanging against the metallic floor. The air inside was thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something sharp and alien. Thor moved with purpose, his massive frame navigating the wreckage with surprising grace. Elias struggled to keep up, his mind still reeling from the transfusion and the strange connection they now shared. "Where are we going?" Elias asked, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Zarnak," Thor said, his voice heavy with disdain. "A rogue warlord who seeks to unite the fractured clans of the HFY under his rule. He has created a weapon, a device capable of harnessing the energy of stars. With it, he can destroy entire systems." Elias's mind raced. "And you're trying to stop him?" Thor nodded. "I was sent to intercept him, but his forces ambushed me. I barely escaped with my life. Thanks to you, I have a second chance. But time is short. Zarnak's weapon is nearly complete. If we do not act soon, countless lives will be lost." Elias swallowed hard. The weight of Thor's words settled over him like a lead blanket. "What do you need from me?" Thor turned to him, his amber eyes piercing. "Your blood has given me strength, but it has also created a bond between us. You are connected to me now, and through me to the HFY. This bond grants you access to our technology, our knowledge. With your help, we can infiltrate Zarnak's stronghold and destroy his weapon." Elias hesitated. The idea of joining a war between alien factions was insane. He was a scientist, not a soldier. But as he looked at the holograms, at the destruction Zarnak had already wrought, he knew he couldn't walk away. "What do I need to do?" Thor's expression softened, just slightly. "You must learn, and quickly." The next few hours were a blur. Thor guided Elias through the ship systems, teaching him how to navigate the holographic interface and access the VYR call database. The technology was unlike anything Elias had ever seen, a seamless blend of biology and machinery. It responded to his touch as if it were alive, the holograms shifting and changing in response to his thoughts. As they worked, Elias felt the bond between them growing stronger. He could sense Kale Thor's emotions, his determination, his fear, his hope. It was overwhelming at times, but it also gave him a strange sense of clarity. He began to understand the VYR call, not just their technology, but their culture, their values. They were a proud people, bound by honor and loyalty, and they were desperate. "We must leave soon," Kale Thor said, breaking the silence. Zarnok's stronghold is on a planet called Krytal, deep in the heart of VYR call space. It will be heavily guarded, but with your help, we can bypass their defenses. Elias nodded, though his stomach churned at the thought. What's the plan? Kale Thor activated a hologram of Krytal, a barren world surrounded by a dense asteroid field. We will approach from the outer rim, using the asteroids as cover. Once we land, we will infiltrate the stronghold and locate the weapon. You will disable its core while I deal with Zarnok. Elias frowned. That sounds risky. It is, Kale Thor admitted. But it is our only chance. Elias took a deep breath, steadying himself. All right, let's do it. They prepared in silence, gathering what supplies they could from the ship. Elias donned a suit of lightweight armor Kale Thor provided, its surface shimmering with the same organic patterns as the ship. It fit him perfectly, as if it had been made for him. Kale Thor armed himself with a massive blade, its edge glowing with a faint blue light. As they boarded a smaller shuttle hidden within the ship, Elias felt a strange sense of calm. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew he wasn't alone. The bond between him and Kale Thor was a lifeline, a reminder that they were in this together. The shuttle launched with a jolt, its engines roaring to life. Elias gripped the armrests as they shot through the atmosphere, the planet's surface shrinking below them. Kale Thor piloted the shuttle with practiced ease, navigating the asteroid field with precision. As they approached Krytal, Elias's heart pounded in his chest. The planet loomed ahead, its surface scarred by war. The stronghold was visible even from space, a massive fortress surrounded by a network of defensive towers. "Ready?" Kale Thor asked, his voice steady. Elias nodded, though his hands were trembling. "Ready." The shuttle descended rapidly, its cloaking systems masking their approach. They landed in a secluded canyon, the stronghold just a few kilometers away. As they stepped out, Elias felt the weight of the mission settle over him. This was it. No turning back. Kale Thor led the way, his movements silent and deliberate. Elias followed, his senses heightened by the bond. He could feel the presence of the enemy, their movements like ripples in a pond. They avoided patrols and security drones, their progress slow but steady. When they reached the stronghold's outer wall, Kale Thor turned to Elias. "This is where we part ways. You must find the weapon's core and disable it. I will deal with Zarnok." Elias nodded, though his heart was racing. "How will I know where to go?" Kale Thor placed a hand on his shoulder, the bond flaring to life. "Trust the bond. It will guide you." With that, Kale Thor turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Elias alone. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, and began to move. The bond pulsed in his mind, a faint but insistent pull. He followed it, his steps quick and quiet. Kale Thor burst into the chamber, his blade glowing with a fierce light. He charged at Zarnok, the two warriors clashing in a flurry of sparks and steel. Elias didn't waste a second. He turned back to the core, his hands flying over the controls. The bond guided him, showing him what to do. He worked frantically, his heart pounding in his chest. As the battle raged behind him, Elias felt a surge of determination. He wasn't just a scientist anymore. He was part of something bigger, and he wasn't going to let it end here. With a final command, the core began to shut down. The machine's pulsing light dimmed, its energy fading. Elias turned, just in time to see Kale Thor deliver the final blow. Zarnok fell, his blade clattering to the ground. For a moment there was silence. Then Kale Thor turned to Elias, his expression one of respect. "You did it." Elias nodded, though his legs felt like jelly. "We did it." But as they stood there, the bond flared to life again. Elias felt a surge of urgency, a warning. Kale Thor's eyes widened. "We must go. Now." Elias didn't ask why. He just followed. As they ran through the stronghold, the ground began to shake. The weapons core, destabilized by Elias's actions, they barely made it to the shuttle, the stronghold exploding behind them as they launched into the sky. As they flew away, Elias looked back at the burning fortress. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing. His life would never be the same, and he was ready for whatever came next. The shuttle shuddered as it broke through Krytal's atmosphere, the explosion from the stronghold fading into a distant glow behind them. Elias slumped into his seat, his body trembling with exhaustion. His hands were still slick with sweat, his mind replaying the chaos of the last few hours. Kale Thor sat across from him, his massive frame filling the small space. The alien warrior's breathing was heavy, his armor scorched and dented from the battle with Zarnok. Yet, despite the weariness etched into his features, there was a quiet satisfaction in his amber eyes. "We did it," Elias said, his voice barely above a whisper. It was more a statement of disbelief than triumph. Kale Thor nodded, his gaze fixed on the stars outside the shuttle's viewport. "For now." But Zarnok was only one piece of a larger puzzle. His death will not end the threat to the VYR call, or to your people. Elias frowned, the weight of Kale Thor's words settling over him like a storm cloud. "What do you mean?" Kale Thor turned to him, his expression grave. "Zarnok was a warlord, but he was not the only one. There are others who seek to unite the clans through force, who would see the galaxy burn for their own gain. And now they will know of you." Elias's stomach churned. "Me? You are bonded to me, Elias. That bond marks you as a friend of the VYR call, and a target for our enemies." Elias leaned back, his mind racing. He had risked everything to help Kale Thor, to stop Zarnok. But now it seemed the danger was far from over. What happens next? Kale Thor was silent for a moment, his gaze drifting back to the stars. "We return to my people. They must know what has happened. And you must decide what role you will play in what comes next." Elias didn't respond. He wasn't sure he could. The idea of stepping into a larger conflict, of becoming a part of something so far beyond his understanding, was overwhelming. Yet, as he looked at Kale Thor, he felt a strange sense of resolve. The bond between them was more than just a connection, it was a responsibility. And he couldn't walk away from that. The journey to the VYR call homeworld was long and uneventful. Elias spent most of it in silence, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Kale Thor, for his part, seemed content to let him process. The alien warrior busied himself with repairing the shuttle systems, his movements precise and methodical. Occasionally, Elias would catch glimpses of the bond, flashes of Kale Thor's memories, his thoughts. It was disorienting, but also strangely comforting. When they finally arrived, Elias was unprepared for what he saw. The VYR call homeworld was a breathtaking sight, its surface a patchwork of vibrant colors and towering structures. The cities were built into the sides of massive cliffs, their spires reaching toward the sky like the fingers of some ancient god. The air was thick with the hum of activity, the streets teeming with beings of all shapes and sizes. Kale Thor guided the shuttle to a landing platform near the heart of the city. As they stepped out, Elias was struck by the sheer scale of everything. The buildings seemed to stretch on forever, their surfaces alive with glowing patterns and shifting lights. The air was filled with the scent of exotic spices and the sound of distant music. "Welcome to VYR Kos," Kale Thor said, his voice tinged with pride. Elias could only nod, his senses overwhelmed. He followed Kale Thor through the bustling streets, the alien warriors and civilians parting to let them pass. He could feel their eyes on him, their curiosity palpable. He was an outsider here, a human in a world of aliens. Yet, there was no hostility in their gazes, only respect. They reached a massive structure at the center of the city, its entrance flanked by towering statues of Vyarkal warriors. Kale Thor led Elias inside, the interior a vast hall filled with holographic displays and intricate carvings. At the far end of the hall was a raised platform, where a group of Vyarkal elders stood, their expressions solemn. Kale Thor approached the platform, bowing his head in respect. Elders, I bring news of Zarnok's defeat, and of the human who made it possible. The elders turned their gaze to Elias, their eyes piercing. One of them, a tall figure with silver-streaked armor, stepped forward. You are the one who bonded with Kale Thor? Elias swallowed hard, nodding. Yes. The elder studied him for a moment, then nodded. You have done a great service to the Vyarkal, but your journey is not over. The bond you share with Kale Thor is rare, and it carries with it a great responsibility. Will you stand with us, human? Will you fight for the future of our people and your own? Elias hesitated, his mind racing. He thought of Earth, of the life he had left behind. He thought of the bond, of the connection he now shared with Kale Thor. And he thought of the threat that still loomed over them all. Finally, he nodded. I will. The elder's expression softened, just slightly. Then you are one of us. The words sent a shiver down Elias's spine. He wasn't sure what they meant, but he knew they were important. He glanced at Kale Thor, who gave him a nod of approval. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Elias was given quarters in the city, a spacious room filled with strange but comfortable furnishings. He spent his time learning about the Vyarkal, their history, their culture. He trained with Kale Thor, honing the skills he would need for the battles to come. And he grew closer to the alien warrior, their bond deepening with each passing day. Yet, despite the camaraderie and the sense of purpose, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. The elders spoke of a gathering storm, of enemies moving in the shadows. And he knew, deep down, that the peace they had won was fragile. One evening, as he stood on a balcony overlooking the city, Kale Thor joined him. The alien warrior was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. What happens now? Elias asked, his voice quiet. Kale Thor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his armor and pulled out a small, crystalline object. It glowed faintly, its light pulsing in time with Elias's heartbeat. This is a shard of the bond, Kale Thor said, handing it to Elias. It is a symbol of our connection, and a reminder of what we fight for. Elias took the shard, its surface warm against his skin. He could feel the bond pulsing within it, a steady, reassuring presence. The road ahead will not be easy, Kale Thor continued, but we will face it together, and whatever comes, we will endure. Elias nodded, his grip tightening on the shard. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing. He was ready to face it. As the sun set over Vyarkos, casting the city in a golden light, Elias felt a sense of peace. He was no longer just a scientist, no longer just a human. He was part of something bigger, and he was ready to fight for it. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in his life, Elias felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be.